Okay, so we're going to talk about a very popular type of software development called Agile. It's really a set of concepts, and it's actually very, very opposed, very, very different from how software was developed maybe back in the 1980s. In the 1980s, almost all software was developed by either a large company like IBM or AT&T Bell Laboratories, or like a government, like the United States government would fund software projects. So they had a large amount of money, they could take many, many employees, and they didn't have to worry about running out of money before the product got to delivery because they did have a large amount of money. So they would put a document together talking about what the product will do when it's eventually finished. And they pretty much name every capability the product could possibly have, then start working on it. Maybe it would take 3 years to develop, and eventually it does everything it tried to get done. And they had the funding for it from either the taxpayer or the company just having a large amount of money that they could fund a team of 100, 150 programmers for 3 years. They had that already started. As times changed, new companies, smaller startup companies would start up who have virtually no money. And they'd start making a product, 4 or 5 people, rent a house for a summer, like when Facebook started, and on very, very limited budget, and they'd make a first pass at a product. Once the first pass is working, then people can start to see what it's going to do when it's already partially built. Then, investors like venture capitalists, we talked about that earlier in the semester, people might look at the product and say, okay, I'll give you some money to get to, the next level. And then when you get to the next level and it looks like it's working even more, then you can get more people to invest money. You can cover the cost of your employees. So it really went from some big bureaucratic government-run software development or large company development to very, very small development where you have to show at each step you're accomplishing something. So the Agile, principles and values is Agile causes teams to have beliefs. Teams have the beliefs to make decisions, and decisions help develop software. Okay, so that's, this is just kind of at a very high level. There's a thing called the Agile Manifesto. You could read this if you want, so I won't read it to you. And then there are the 12 principles of Agile. So we'll look through these, and we'll look through them all. I'll pick up the ones that are the most important. So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous development. So what that really means is, instead of spending 3 years building a product and then finally saying to the customer, here it is, what do you think? And the customer goes, I like some of it, but some of it was a total waste of time. I didn't really want that part of the product. It would be better to show them in increments what you're building. Okay, so then welcome changing requirements, even late in development, Agile process harnesses change for customers' competitive advantage. So that's the name of our course, right? The competitive advantage, but that's actually in there, one of their principles. So the idea is if you're building something and the customer says, oh, I'd like it to be slightly changed, you want to be able to incorporate their changes. So you don't want to have like a hardcore, here's our system requirements, and then everyone starts developing it, and then they can't change in the middle of development. So, okay. The third principle, deliver working software frequently, from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So the idea is you want to make increments and have 1 or 2 of your customers look at it, maybe even use it. If you could give them a beta release, at least that's not official, that they could play around with, they could give you customer feedback. So the business people, the people who you're going to eventually be selling the product to, the people at your company who know the customers you're going to be selling the product to, and the developers must work tightly together throughout the projects. So that's very important too. A company like IBM used to, like I said, they'd spend 3 years developing something and then give it to the customer, and the customer and the software developers never spoke to each other. So then you want to build products around motivated individuals, get them in environments that support, need, and trust each other to get the job done. That one's not too important. Okay. So yeah, so this one's kind of interesting because one of their principles is that the best way for employees to be working together is to work together in face-to-face conversations. So it's a belief of the Agile software development that you're not doing this with teams scattered throughout either the country or throughout the world. You'd be much better off solving problems if you're going to solve them quickly if you could meet face-to-face. Get into a room, 3 or 4 people, design a fix for the problem, implement it, and then within a day or two see if that works. So, so working software is the primary measure of progress. So you want to have your features in your software be something that you can demonstrate by running the software. Sustainable development is also important. Sponsors, the people who are paying you for developing it, the developers and the users should be able to maintain constant pace. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design, enhancement, agility. Okay, obviously that makes sense. Simplicity, like to keep this simple. Best architectures, requirement designs emerge from self-organizing teams. So, and in a sense, this number 11 one is kind of saying you don't want to restrict yourself to saying, you know, we always have to use the Linux platform. Or we always have to use Windows. So we must always program in Java. So there are a lot of software companies or software divisions at financial companies where a high-level person made a decision, everything's going to be done in C++. Every single employee must know C++. Instead, you'd rather hire people who know different platform technologies who can get jobs done and then integrate those products together. Okay. And then, okay. So, and again, it's all about flexibility and being able to make quick adjustments to the system. So we talked early in the semester about utility, and one of the things Agile likes to do is, you know, have a utility giving people a common foundation for making decisions about the best way to do something. So what that kind of is saying is that if you know a way to do something, and someone comes along and says, hey, I think we can do it a slightly better way, it's going to take a little bit longer, cost a little bit more, but the advantage will be worth more than the cost of making the switch. So there'd be positive utility in making the decision, you could then go ahead and make that decision. So here's just kind of a silly example of the idea behind Agile. Suppose you had an idea for some product, some phone app or website that you wanted to do. So what you could do, at first, it's just an idea in your head. So you can plan out a first release number 1 of your software. And maybe you have a release 1.0, and maybe it's a website that users can log into. So you create a website, you show that people can type in their email address and a password, hit enter, and it'll say password is invalid or welcome Jim, just to show that people can log in. Once you log in, you can't do anything. But that's it, that's release 1.0. Release 1.0, create a website that people can log into, and that's it. Then you can make a change to it. Users can upload pictures. Well, you have to be able to log in first before you can upload pictures, so that would be a step that comes after that. So now once you get the part where users can log in, they can log in. Next phase, let them upload pictures. Now you can see the pictures. So you log in as you put up a picture of you, your picture shows up on your account. My picture shows up on my account. You know, you could test it. Maybe if my picture shows up on your account, there's something wrong with the software. After you do that, there's security about logins. So there's a whole bunch of issues about logins, like someone trying to crack into the system, logging in with your user ID 10 times. You can lock the account out and then send them an email that says your account's been locked out because somebody's trying to log into it, but it looks like it's not you. So we could do security on logins. Okay, so why would we do it in these phases? Well, first of all, nothing really happens unless people can log in. Really, at that point, nothing's happening. If we can get that working, we can actually show people, hey, we have a website. People can log in. You type in your email, your password, you hit enter, it says, welcome Mary. Okay. Then, the next step, you can show, watch me upload my picture. You upload your picture, you see a picture. Then you say, well, now we're going to make login more secure. Right now, anybody can log in. They can try a million times your password to crack into the system. Eventually, they can get in. We put a little security on. This part you won't even well, this you could demonstrate. You could show, you log into the account 10 times, the account locks out. But you don't need this as quickly as you need this part. So let's say the first release of this software, release 1.0, release 1.1, and release 1.2, is just to get the login working. Now you might think, what value does that have? A website that you can log into, upload a picture, and that's it. That website doesn't have a lot of value, except you can now show this to an investor and say, I have an idea. Let's say the idea gets down to release 4.0. Here's my idea, and by the way, this is what the website looks like. So you could show, I'm partially on my way to getting this thing done. Would you like to invest in my project? At least you could show a little progress. So now you have a second release. Let's say release 2.0. Users can form friendships with other users. Well, this takes a little bit harder to demonstrate because now you need to create many logins. And then like Facebook or Twitter, I'm a friend with you and you're a friend with me. You could demonstrate that the person you're trying to be friends with has to approve you as a friend before you could have friends. You could have friendships that are two-way, like on Facebook. If I'm friends with you, you're friends with me. You could have one-way friendships, like Twitter. They call it following. I can follow you, but you are not following me. So it's kind of a one-way. I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at your stuff, but you're not looking at my stuff. So you can decide what your definition of friendships or connections are. Then, once you get that part working, where different users on your website can be friends with each other, then users can create and form groups. Maybe the 5 of us can join together and form a group. And then within that group, we could, schedule events together. So that would be another thing we could do as part of release 2. So that would be our release 2.0, where the first part is letting people log into the website. The second part is once they log in, they can form friendships and groups with each other. Let's say this has something to do with whatever this website, this idea of yours, this is some functionality that would be needed to do that. So at the end of release 2, which really came in 2 different steps, you develop this part, then once this is working, you develop this part. At the end of step 2, you can now show this product to investors and say, oh, watch this product. I can join the website. The login is pretty secure. Then the users can become friends with each other. That's one-on-one friendships. Then we could also have group friendships. And now we have group friendships, which is needed for my master plan. At this point, you can show more functionality and maybe get more investment dollars in the project. So then let's say release 3.0 is, well, so far everything that we've done is sitting down at a laptop and logging into a website. Now we want a mobile app where people can do it, walking around like your students all do, walking around the campus, and you can log in. So maybe release 3 is to create the mobile app. So we want to make mobile devices applications that connect to our product. Mobile devices have security holes in it, so we'll work on the security of the second part. It would be really nice to demonstrate to a customer once the mobile app connects to the website. And the security part's a lot more work. Okay, and then release 4.0, 4.1, 4.2 is really going to be a series of releases that's very, very unique to your app. Many applications like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, many of the social networks do all of this. So you're going to do all of this at the beginning just to get started, and then whatever your new idea is, that's really what you're doing. But the point of having a schedule like this, release 1, release 2, release 3, and even breaking them down into sub-steps, is so that you can develop each step, convince yourself it's working, go on to the next one. Convince yourself it's working. And if you happen to have a customer you wanted to show this product to, They could even guide you at each point, saying, oh, you forgot to add some security to logins. It's very important to us that you add something maybe you didn't consider. And you'd like to be able to change the requirements and add that part. The way it used to work back in the 1980s, if a company like IBM was going to do this, they would build the entire product without talking to anybody and then release it. And say, what do you think of that? Well, you can do that if you have enough money to pay for all the employees who are going to work on this thing from start to finish. But if you don't have that money, you want to break it down into steps where you can demonstrate that each step along the way is working. So in order to do that, your product development is going to be, you're going to write up some requirements, what the step has to do. You have to be able to log in. People can't log in twice, because if they're already logged in once, they can't log in a second time. Well, maybe they can, it's up to you. You're going to design how the software is going to go, and then you're going to build the software. So you're kind of going in this circle. You're building the software. Once you're building the software, you test the software. Now, if the test fails, you come around and try to do it again. If you get sign-off saying it works, you kind of release it out to the real world, and it goes under system testing. This is like before it gets released. This is finally like a release 1.0 or 2.0. And so if things don't work out, you have to start the cycle over again. If things do work out, then you start the next release. So your software group just keeps going in circles like this. You could have people writing requirements. You could have software developers. The developers put their code together and build it, send it over to your test group. If it tests fine, it goes into system test. That's the overall product. So every time you're going around this circle, you're doing one of these releases. You're doing one of the, you do this step, that's a one loop around the circle. You ship it out, once you're happy with it, you start the next step, goes around the circle again. So we're going to keep going around the circle over and over and over. Every time some point release is acceptable, you ship that out to the main product, gets tested with all the previous functions, and that becomes a release. You just keep doing this over and over. At the point where we say if we like it, we can say, do we want to make any changes? Do we have any input from customers where change needs to come in? And then we make our next iteration. So this is kind of the Agile process. You start, your team keeps going around in circles, and every release it kicks out something. If it finds it acceptable, kicks it out, and eventually goes to the current release. So popular names for people who are on these teams are, there's a product owner. Make sure that the right features get in on the wish list. So the product owner is the person or the people who are coming up with what goes on our list at each stage in our product. So they're the product owner. And then the Scrum Master, that's the name of the person. So now what we're going to have to do, because this keeps going around and around, we have to get all these people together, sometimes once a day, sometimes once a week, but a lot of companies now do it once a day, like 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day there's a meeting that puts all these people together and says, where are you in, whether it's the current release or the next one that's coming up on the next lap of the cycle, where are you, how much work have you done? Sometimes they'll even have a meeting daily and say, how much work have you done since yesterday's meeting? So the person who's running this daily meeting is called the Scrum Master. And then the developers are the people who build the product. The testers are the people who test the product, obviously. And the customers use it and pay for it. And sometimes the Scrum, the daily meeting, could invite customers in. Sometimes you don't want customers in. If you're going to talk about why products aren't ready yet, you might not want the customer around. Things that are going wrong. And sometimes you'll invite the customers into these Scrum meetings, the daily meetings. Okay. So then we get into release planning, which we identify which items that we're building will go into the product backlog and go into each release. So we could have a Scrum Master is running a meeting, and we have what's called a sprint. So a sprint is where you pick one of the items in the release, and you go around the cycle, and you build that feature into the main product. And you could have a Scrum meeting, you could have one every 24 hours. So you could have a daily meeting talking about the progress of that cycle. And then eventually when you finish all your work, after doing many, many laps, you eventually get your product finished. So, then we now have to estimate, we have to figure out how to estimate the time for each of these tasks. And it's common to call the tasks stories. But anyway, so what we could do is we can have, they usually use powers of 2, 1, 2, 4, or 8 hour tasks. So if you have a task that you think your group of 4 people can do in 3 hours, then a 3-hour task would turn into a 4-hour task. So you just go up to the nearest power of 2 for hours. And it's popular to have time periods in days of maybe 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days. And then for bigger projects, it could be 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 months. So a sprint is a short duration milestone, anywhere from 2 to 30 days. So if a group of people wanted to put a feature in, like allowing users to upload a picture, you might be able to do that in 4 days. So you could have a 4-day sprint that allows the users of your website to upload their picture. You upload the picture, you test that it got uploaded, it doesn't get uploaded onto other people's accounts, it only gets uploaded on the account who's logged in. And then as each of those sprints get started, you have an estimate of how many hours it's going to be till it finishes. So then they have what they call a burn down chart, which shows the work remaining versus time. So you could have a sprint that lasts 5 days, and say after 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, it's working its way down to 0. So at every daily meeting, the Scrum meeting, you're looking at how that chart heading down towards 0. If it's not heading down to 0, then it might be a delay in finishing it. You'd have to alert your management that this sprint is taking longer than was expected. So the daily Scrum, the daily meeting, we're standing, and then we go over the standings, and then we also go over what has changed since yesterday's meeting. And then at the end of each one of these laps, at the end of each time we go around one of these circles, right? So let's say, for example, release 1.1, we're going to let users upload a picture of themselves. So if we're going to do that, we're going to let users upload a picture of themselves, and let's say we estimated that this would take 5 days. So over the 5 days to get this done, we'd have a daily meeting, right? So we're doing 1 lap around here is 5 days. Each day we're having a meeting going over the events and what has changed since yesterday. Suppose it turns out that it took us 8 days. We thought at the beginning it should take 5, but it's taking us 8. So what if that happened? We'd want to have a meeting at the, a sprint retrospective meeting, and ask ourselves why did we think it would take 5 days, but it actually took us 8 days? And if there's something if that extra 3 days is going to keep happening over and over with, this is a problem we might want to fix. Do we need to hire more employees? Are there employees who just don't have the skills on the platform that we're using that made us take extra time? So you want to have a sprint retrospective meeting, look back and just say what went well and what went poorly on that sprint, and correct problems for the next sprint. So really the big issue with Agile development, it's conceptual. It's not like you don't go down to Staples and buy the Agile software off the block and then off the shelf and have your users start using the software. That's not the idea. This is just a concept of how to build software. You could do this with a very, very small team. In fact, you can do it by yourself. You could create a website that lets people log in. And you could create, so you'd be your own Scrum Master, obviously. You could let people upload their pictures. You could then work on the security. Once that's working, you can now demonstrate it to somebody that this is working. And go, all right, this guy looks like he knows what he's doing. What's the eventual plan? That's whatever your idea is. That's down here, release 4.0. And you start saying, if I could hire some people, I could do this stage quicker and this stage quicker. Maybe you don't have the mobile skills. The skills to develop, Android development or Apple development. Maybe you don't have those skills and you're going to need to hire somebody else. Well, where are you going to get the money to hire somebody else? Some investor's going to give you money. They'll say, oh, I want 20% of your company, but here's $2 million to go hire people. Well, before they're going to give you $2 million, you've got to show them something's working. So, you get to this point, maybe they'll give you money to hire some people. Then you make this part. If this part goes well and you get to here, then they might give you more money to develop your product. So the best way to show angel investors is to not build the whole thing start to finish by yourself and then say, now can I have money? That's not going to work. So what you'd rather do is using the Agile. Develop this, then develop this, then develop this. Work your way down, eventually hit a point where you have, at each step you can demonstrate that this product is getting closer and closer to being finished. And you have the flexibility that as you're developing something and maybe some feature didn't work quite the way you wanted to do, you could adjust later stages to match whatever went unexpected in a previous release. So it's flexible. Flexible software developing iteratively, so they use the word agile, meaning it's flexible and easy to use. So, okay. So are there any